I turn to you, Lieutenant Colonel Reid. You also have provided statements to the Royal Commission. The first, I think, is under tab 2, and that's a statement dated the 21st of November 2016.
Yes.
You have that?
Yes, I do.
And the contents of that are true and correct?
Yes, they are.
I tender that.
It'll be Exhibit 49-5.
And then behind tab 3 is a further statement dated the 28th of November 2016.
Yes.
And the contents of that are true and correct?
Yes, they are.
I tender that.
That'll be 49-6.
I also tender the 3-volume tender bundle.
That together will be 49-7.
Thank you. Now, in your statement, which is behind tab 3, you refer to the services that the Salvation Army offers in relation to children.
Yes.
Perhaps if we can have that on the screen. You start at page 3 in relation to the Eastern Territory, and it goes for, frankly, pages and pages.
Pages and pages.
Of those services, some of them involve accommodation. That's right?
Yes.
And what are the circumstances in which the Salvation Army runs services that accommodate children?
Certainly within our camps, we look after children, obviously. In our Sagala ministries, we will have times where children will stay over in that. Can I just have a clarification in accommodating? Are you talking about accommodating as in sleeping or working with?
Accommodating as in accommodation where someone sleeps.
Yes, thank you. I just needed clarification. Yes, so mainly it's those programs for us in the Sydney, in the Australia East, our camps and our Sagala areas. We do have some youth hostels for homeless services, and our recovery services, particularly up in the Queensland recovery services, have family recovery.
You also have homeless services and crisis accommodation for children, is that right?
For mothers and children.
Not
yes.
children alone?
Not children alone. We don't have any children alone crisis.
Given the considerable range of services you offer that children engage with, what do you consider the greatest areas of risk to be in relation to child protection matters?
Well, certainly if our employees, volunteers or officers don't fulfil the requirements, that's the greatest risk we have.
Yes, that's certainly the case. If someone does something wrong, that's
yes.
a risk.
Yes.
Leaving aside just the simple fact of someone doing something wrong, what are the circumstances or contexts in which you think that is a greater risk? Given the nature of the services you offer?
Yes, well, I'm not involved in all services.
I'm sure you're not, but as the head of personnel,
yes,
you would have sufficient knowledge of them, and given your role in the Centre for Restoration,
yes,
then you must have thought of the risks that are posed by these services in order then to consider how you ameliorate them or mitigate against them. That's what I'm asking.
Well, certainly, if people are not aware of their obligations, if people are not aware of their boundaries in that, thus our Safe Salvos training in this, I guess I can't answer it much further than that, and it's probably not sufficient for you by the sounds of things.
Commissioner Tidd, have you got anything you want to say about what you consider to be the greatest areas of risk?
I think some of the greatest areas of risk for us are in areas where there is overnight accommodation, whether that's in residential care that we continue to offer to youth at risk, or whether that's in some of our camping programs. And so recognizing for our camping programs, the SB3 risk mitigation pieces are in place for that no camp can take place unless the entire SB3 process is filled out and approved at the next level up. In our accommodation, that's really governed much more stringently by our social service provision guidelines, and the policies are very extensive in those areas.
Do you have a staff-child ratio in relation to overnight accommodation?
I don't know offhand.
You can see how something like that, if it was an adequate ratio, would have protective elements.
Right.
Are you involved in any of that?
I have an oversight of it. I'm not specifically involved in it. Our SP3 does set staff-children ratios for activities, so depending on the age of the child or the nature of the activity, I couldn't give you specifically what that criteria is, and I would imagine that there would be similar ratios if there were, for example, for the camps, and again, depending on the age and the numbers of children involved, but there would definitely be ratios.
Colonel Campbell, what do you see in terms of your Eastern Territory work as the greatest risk?
Greatest risk, I think, is in our culture too, in the sense of people not taking seriously enough, with a zero tolerance. I think that's a risk for people coming into the organisation, whether they be employees or officers, and understanding the level of seriousness that we have within the Salvation Army, and for them to understand that as soon as possible. I think that's a risk.
How do you ameliorate that risk?
I think it's in our, for employees, particularly in our pre-work with them, coming into the organisation as employees, the standards.
What pre-work do you do?
Pre-work as in pre-employment, so they come in for the day, they have orientation videos, they have material, they talk about what the Salvation Army are, the standards. So we have an orientation period that they have, and officers obviously in our 2 years of training have that training and expectation as well. So
is the emphasis on the values and missions of the Army primarily in that training program?
I think both. I think we need to understand what the mission of the Salvation Army is, our values as well, and as well as within that, keeping our values with our procedures and policies and adhering to those.
Child protection wasn't mentioned in what you've just said. Tell me how it is that you, in your territory, ensure that child protection is front and centre of the people who are coming into your organisation.
For anyone who works in that particular area with children, it's mandatory with the training. So I think doing training even before they start, they need to complete the mandatory training and the expectations that's there for them. For officers, it's the same. Well, actually, all officers, whether actually they are working children's work or not, it's mandatory for them, each officer, to do the training.
In terms of children's work, as you've described it, can you give us a sense as to the proportion of the work and services you provide that is in relation to children?
Yeah, it's a bit difficult because the broadness of even aged care through to our youth programs as listed here. I'm not sure if I could give a percentage of work on that.
Is it 70% or closer to 30%?
Oh, I'd be probably 30%. Be closer to the lower percent, I think, because the broadness of our, crisis accommodation, aged care plus, employment plus, a lot of them are with adults, so it's probably at the lower end, yes.
Lieutenant Colonel, is that your understanding too of your area?
Certainly, I'll just add some things to what Colonel Mark said. With our employees, volunteers, etc., everybody has to have working with children check. That's part of our child safe standard. People have to understand our code of conduct and have that signed. They also have to have the training in the Safe Salvos manual and a criminal history check. So that is needed for anyone who works with our children or is employed in anything that has the possibility of being near children.
So what do you think about about 30%? Does that sound about right to you?
We have a high proportion of children in our programs, and it really is difficult to give an estimation. In some places, children we would have more children than adults in our children's programs. Say, in the local church, for instance, it may be a small church of 30, 40 people, but they may have between their Sagala, which is similar to guides, scouts, etc., guides, Sunday school, mainly music, a whole lot of things. You may have 100 children coming to that place in that time. So it is difficult to give a proportion.
Commissioner, did you understand, particularly from the evidence that you gave in case study 33 about the Southern Territory, the interest in and issues about the claims handling process in the Southern Territory, and I'm sure you're aware of the Eastern Territory as well. Can we start with the Southern Territory, and can you firstly tell us what reviews or other similar processes the Salvation Army Southern Territory carried out following case study 33 in relation to claims handling?
With regards to the claims handling, we reviewed how we did the management of our claims. An approach took on notice from case study 33, but also from the Victorian Inquiry, some changes that need to take place with regards to how do we handle when a survivor comes forward with an allegation and is seeking some sort of support or response from the organisation. We were criticised, and respectfully, rightly so, for our apology approach, the apology that seemed to not, in fact, be an apology and was not personal. Took a very different approach on that, the approach being one of the availability of someone from the organisation, a senior leader, myself included, to meet with the individual and offer a verbal apology, in addition to thereafter writing a personal apology. There was some consideration again as to how do we manage when a claim comes to the Salvation Army through a lawyer. How do we ensure that we manage that appropriately? We don't look like we're trying to make it a very hard and cold piece. The introduction of Major Wayne Pittaway, a senior officer who had served for a number of years as a Salvation Army officer, and his last appointment prior to this one was as a divisional commander, has been appointed to be the territorial commander's representative, my representative, for pastoral care for all survivors and claims. He's present for any interaction together with the lawyers in the settling of claims. When Trevor Walker, who's the director of the Professional Standards Unit, takes the first interview with the claimant, where there's the opportunity for a second interview to follow up, Trevor now takes Wayne Pittaway, Major Wayne Pittaway, with him and introduces him as available to the individual. So Wayne offers from the beginning of the journey that sense of Salvation Army engagement with the individual. It's not simply a cold process between lawyers, the Salvation Army's engagement and involvement, and also journeys along with the offer of counselling that's made available as well now that in the past was not consistently offered.
So it now is consistently offered?
There's an offer of counselling where counselling has not already been introduced. If the counselling has already been introduced, if they come to the table indicating that I'm already engaged in counselling, no further offer of counselling is provided. But if a further extension of counselling is required or requested, that's certainly available.
When somebody indicates a desire for counselling, is it the case that you give them a set sum of money and leave them to determine who the counsellor is going to be?
That has been our practice in the recent months since, rather than prescribing specifically who, a sum of money is made available for counselling for them to pursue at their own initiative.
And those who are already undergoing counselling, do you equally provide them a sum of money to continue it?
If it's requested, if it's desired of them, that there's a need for ongoing counselling.
Is it the case that counselling is a matter that's initiated by you in the process, or do you wait until the claimant initiates it?
I believe if it's not already in place, then the offer is made.
And now, there was a question in the 2015 case study as to the review of or opening of claims that had already been settled.
Yes.
What happened about that review?
Following case study 33 in 2015, during that case study, we made a commitment to review settled claims internally to assure that they were assessed fairly and consistently relative to the bulk of the other claims. So there was
other claims within the
the Salvation Army Southern Territory to make sure there was a consistency over the course of the time frame that we have been assessing and resolving claims.
And by consistency, you mean in the amounts offered?
And the amounts offered, and ensuring that consistent as far as the type of abuse, the severity of abuse, and other factors was considered. Also, recognition that were we consistent in our dealing with those who had not been legally represented? Were they disadvantaged in any way? Were those who were legally represented and commenced proceedings limited in their response from the Salvation Army by technical defenses? That was considered as well. Where there was new information that came forward. For example, if someone was a claimant and they were the first claimant against an alleged abuser, we may have settled, we want to ensure in the review that were there other claims against the same individual, that we were consistent in the managing of the claim response.
Did you publish the criteria and process by which you were to undertake this review?
I can't recall if the actual process was published.
How was it that claimants would know whether or not their settlement was being reviewed, and if so, in what manner?
We posted on our website when the process was completed. With the recognition of conclusion of case study 33, we indicated there again that we would review all of the cases. At the conclusion, we did post on the website that the claims review had been completed. Where there was a top-up recommended and all recommendations were embraced and supported, we then took an approach in two manners. Where there had been legal representation in the past, message was given to the legal representation for the survivor that the claim had been reviewed and that the top-up was available and the payment was made available through legal representation. Where there had not been legal representation, we sought direction from William Wainwright, a psychologist that has worked with the Salvation Army with regards to survivors and been a member of our National Professional Standards Council, as to how do we make the best approach. The risk for us was a consideration that we did not want to re-traumatize. William looked at the documentation and suggested that in light of the amount of top-ups, recognizing that of the 422 claims reviewed, 198 were reassessed and 73 were granted top-ups, totaling 960,000, and the average top-up being 13,000.
Given those figures, you say that 198, so just under half were reassessed. What happened to the other just over half?
The other half were not reassessed, they were reviewed, and it was felt that there was already consistency in the way in which the case was managed.
So consistency with new standards you were applying, or consistency among those within the group?
Consistency was an internal review over the consistency of that which had already taken place. So those that had received ex gratia payments in excess of 50,000 were above the 44,000 average, so they were not included.
So you worked out what the average was and looked at those who were at or beneath it. Is that right?
That's correct. Or were affected by the other factors identified, that there was new evidence or that there was a legal proceedings commenced and the potential risk of technical defences.
That has the effect, I assume, that you move the average up at the end of the process.
The average would have moved up if the average...
But no one who originally sat above the average has been reviewed.
Correct.
Is that fair? Is that fair?
Except for those that were, there were those that were reviewed that were above the average of 50,000. If they were unrepresented, regardless of what their settlement was, they were reviewed. And if they had moved to proceedings and had settled for under $50,000, they were reviewed.
You understand the point of my question, though?
Yes.
So if you look at the criteria to understand it, if a person received $50,000 or more, was represented, there were none of the technical defences used,
Correct.
They weren't reviewed.
That's correct.
And if you fell within other categories, that is over 50 technical defences and legally represented, you were reviewed. Is that right?
Give me the last qualification again.
If it was you received over $50,000, the technical defences were employed, and you were legally represented, you weren't reviewed.
No, if they had proceeded, if they were legally represented and proceedings were issued and it was settled under 50,000, it was not reviewed.
I understand that. I'm just talking about over 50. There seems to be three categories. One we've agreed on. The second is over 50, the use of technical defences and representation.
They were not reviewed further.
That's right. And the other than that, all cases were reviewed. Is that right?
If they were unrepresented, they were reviewed.
All unrepresented.
All unrepresented were reviewed. All that received no compensation in their initial claim were reviewed.
And
Can I just clarify wording here?
Yeah.
Can I just understand? I understood you said previously to Mr. Fennes that 422 claim files were reviewed and 198 were reassessed.
Correct.
and we seem to be interchanging the words, but as I understand, am I correct that you reviewed 422 files?
We reviewed
Right.
422 files,
And you reassessed 198,
and the review was then to categorize them,
yes?
and then 198 were reassessed.
Right, okay, so thanks for that.
So of the 198 that were reassessed, did you use a particular matrix against which you assessed them?
We used the same guidelines that were outlined in the Royal Commission's National Redress 40-40-20, the nature of the abuse, the severity of the abuse, and other factors, and compared that across the existing internal study.
And did you have regard to a particular sum of money as the upper amount as part of that reassessment?
We did not.
So on what basis did you determine that it was 40% of something?
We looked for the internal consistency. We were looking to make sure that we had internally managed consistently the number.
So just to understand the internal consistency, the amount of money was the average that was paid? Is that was the benchmark, was it?
The benchmark would have recognized the average that was paid in all claims and then similar claims.
So that in the event that the average of 50,000 was paid and the matrix was applied in whatever appropriate way, if then on reassessment it was the same outcome of the matrix but less money, you'd give them a top-up.
Correct.
And if it came out that it was the same matrix and more was paid, does that mean you reconsidered those who had less for the same outcome of a matrix?
I don't know that I could answer that specifically.
Goes to His Honour's point about the average moving up as a result of this process.
The average originally had been 44,000, and so we set a limit at 50,000 to do the assessments.
And as you say, the 50,000 was because that was the average.
The 44 was the average. 50 was what was determined in the past, working with claim settlements, was the pre-approved limit that could be negotiated. So we used that as the starting spot.
So as a result of this process, you looked at just under half of them,
Correct.
reassessed them, and tell us again what were the percentages that flowed from that?
Yeah. 73 of those cases were recommended for top-up, and the average was 13,000.
13,000.
13,239.
And can we assume that, generally speaking, that 13,000 got them up to around 50,000?
I don't have the average result that brings then for
Does
each
that make
case.
sense as a matter of logic? Please feel free to correct me if my logic isn't right.
It would make sense from a logic view.
So is that the completion of your review of claims?
That is, at this point in time, the completion of the review of claims. It was the commitment made to do an internal review to ensure that we were consistent in the way in which we had applied the adjudicating.
Who did the internal review?
The internal review was conducted by Clayton Utz and barristers, solicitors,
So was it
independent of the Salvation Army and independent of Phil Bruin, who had actually managed the cases originally.
And presumably they made recommendations to you and you accepted or otherwise those recommendations?
That's correct.
Did you not accept any of them?
All recommendations were accepted.
I'm not sure I understand. You said $50,000 was the originally approved limit.
As outlined in case study 33, the Salvation Army did not have a cap at 50,000, but Phil Bruin was given authorization to negotiate settlements up to $50,000 without having to come back to the Territorial Finance Council.
Right. So, yes, all right.
In the event that there is a Commonwealth national scheme along the lines set out in the Royal Commission's report, what do you envisage will happen if people come back to you for a reassessment on the basis that the upper limit is higher, indeed much higher?
Yeah. That's a piece that we are ready to explore with the Commonwealth. That's part of our conversation list for them as to what is the anticipated involvement and engagement, what's the anticipated approach in light of their suggestion of a $150,000 cap.
Have you had feedback on review process today?
Not specifically, no.
No.
I can't help but notice the advertisements that have been in the papers for the last 2 or 3 days.
Yes.
Why did they happen now?
Those were posted in partnership together with the Eastern Territory, and perhaps Lieutenant Colonel Chris Reid could speak to that as well.
Have those similar advertisements been placed in newspapers before?
I don't believe they've been in the newspaper before. They've been on our websites, and it's been notified to other agencies.
Why are they placed in the newspapers now?
We wanted to be on the front foot of helping survivors. Each time something to do with the Royal Commission comes up, survivors do contact us. So we wanted to be able to say again that we are happy to reassess claims. That was our commitment from Commissioner James Condon with case study 5 and 10. And we wanted to say we have reassessed claims since June 14. And if people haven't had that prior, they are quite welcome to come back and have a claim reassessed. So we just wanted to get on the front foot with us coming into the hearing.
I think it also provided for us, from the Southern Territory, our perspective. We'd already been able to contact survivors who had legal representation, but again, recognizing the advice from William Wainwright, finding ways to inform other survivors who had not been represented so they could approach us. So this provided the opportunity, recognizing that many survivors would be aware of the case study this week, would have their attention drawn to it. It would provide an opportunity for that question to be available to them.
Well, the advertisement was primarily, if not entirely, about the Eastern Territory. And the end of it was that if your past claim related to the Southern Territory, we would recommend you visit the website for the Professional Standards Unit. What was the intention of providing that information to the Southern people?
The intention of that allows the claims review for those who had been contacting us or those who were curious. It was on our website. That was the contact address for them to indicate they had a claim in the past. They wanted to know the status of their claims review.
So it was not suggesting you were opening the review process?
It was suggesting no, because the review process is complete. It was the opportunity for them to find out what the review process would mean for their own case.
So what it would have meant, because the process was complete.
It would give them an understanding as to the outcome of the review that's taken place for all the Southern Territory cases. So if they had a case in the past, had not been contacted yet because they didn't have legal representation and we've not been able to contact them yet, it would give them the opportunity to understand they could contact the Salvation Army Southern Territory.
To be told, presumably, that their case was or was not reassessed,
Correct.
and if it was, what the outcome was.
Correct.
Assuming that you hadn't contacted them earlier.
Correct.
So it wasn't the case that there was necessarily a contact between you and the person in order for you to assess the case. You did that regardless of contact.
We did the case assessment based on the documents provided.
And I take it that from now on you'll be waiting for and perhaps engaging in discussion about what the National Redress Scheme will look like.
Correct.
And then determine based on the parameters what you will do.
Correct.
But you're clearly open to having individuals go forth under that scheme, and if a greater amount is determined by whatever means, you haven't ruled out participating at that level.
Yeah, the Salvation Army is committed from the beginning to a national redress and the implications and the cooperation together with state and Commonwealth government.
And the implication is you might have to pay more money.
Recognize that, as we've already indicated even in this review.
Thank you. Now, who's best to talk to the Eastern Territory's work?
With regards to case
claims?
review?
Yes.
Colonel Chris Reid.
Now, there were 2 hearings conducted in the first half of 2014. The second one concerned claims handling. Can you tell us what work has been done since then on looking at the claims that had already been before you?
Yeah, we had 2 barristers and a representative from Salvos Legal that looked at all our claims files within what was the Professional Standards Office, and made a number of recommendations. I think there were about 40-something recommendations for us to work on, which which we took it upon ourselves to look at how we could best.
So I'm just having a bit of trouble hearing.
Sorry. We had about 45 recommendations, and that was taken to our policy council, and we agreed to work on those recommendations. Out of that, the Centre for Restoration emerged out of one of those recommendations. We've had a policy that people are able to come back to us to have their claim reviewed, particularly those earlier claims where there wasn't a matrix used. We've used the matrix for institutional claims that has a cap of 150,000. The average is around about 65,000 that we have paid out, with the cap of 155,000 for that.
Can I just stop you there for the moment? When did you introduce the cap of 150,000?
With the matrix that we've been using, that since the case study 5 and 10, I believe.
So that was early 2014. The hearings were held, the reports were tabled later.
After that, because we took upon ourselves to use, for those who are not part of the institutional claims, the draft matrix that the Royal Commission used, and also the cap that they were suggesting back in that space.
So you adopted the approach of the Royal Commission initially in its discussion paper and then ultimately in what you did post 2014?
Yes.
And was that in respect of only people who came to you?
In respect to, yes, the people that came to us, yes.
But people who came to you post that time and asked for a review, or everyone that was on your books?
Everyone that was on our books at that stage, when we adopted the 150,000 cap, is we've used that matrix, both matrices.
Who undertook the assessment of the actual claims?
Of the claims, we had 2 barristers and a representative from Salvo's Legal.
Now, I've been handed a number of tables. Perhaps if we can have copies provided to the bench. You've got a copy with you?
Yes.
Now, I understand this has been provided for the purpose of this hearing and created for the purpose of this hearing.
Yes.
That's right. And we're to understand that the 4 boys' homes referred to in the opening line refers to the boys' homes, the subject of the first case study.
Yes. This is only the remit of the Royal Commission with child sexual abuse.
Yes, I understand that. So that's Bexley, Gill, Alkira, Indooroopilly, Riverview.
And the Gill, yes.
That's right?
Yep.
And so these are claims in respect of child sexual abuse at a Salvation Army home.
Yes.
And the period is said to be between 2014 and 2016. I understand that to be between January 2014 and December 2016.
Yes.
That's correct?
That's right.
And the way to understand it is Table 1 is payments categorised by process. So if we look on the left side, we've got claims without litigation, presumably people just contacting you without lawyers. Claims where litigation was commenced.
Yes.
And then claims that haven't been finalised one way or the other.
Yes.
And that tells us that there were 53 claims made between that period.
Yes.
And just to note, the period predates the Royal Commission's hearings. And there are no claims where litigation was commenced, and 10 of the 53 haven't been finalised. And so the minimum payment was $30,000 with a maximum of $205,000.
Yes.
With an average of about $75,000.
Yes. So I need
And a
to
total.
change.
I beg your pardon?
Oh, sorry, I just need to change my earlier statement of 65. I thought it was 65, our average.
But these, you accept these. So $75,000 as an average payment and about $4 million total.
Yes.
Now, the second table is for claims not litigated.
Yes.
So these are people who came to you and there was never a litigation process.
That's right.
and we've got 41 in 2014, 14 in 2015 and 8 in 2016. That's right.
Yes.
I don't quite understand how that fits with the 53 number. You see you've got on table 1 the claims without litigation is 53.
Yes.
And table 2 is claims not litigated, and if I add them up, it comes to 60 something.
It'll come to 63, which is all claims.
Oh, I see what you mean. So not taking into account the 10 that are finalised. Thank you. I understand that. So in relation to these payments, we can see that the minimum payment increased from 2014 to 30,000, from 30,000 to 60,000 in 2016.
Yes.
And maximum from 120 to 205,000.
Yes. Yes.
And the median payment reduced from 75,000 to 70,000, and the average payment increased from 74,000 to 114,000.
That's correct.
And each of those claims, the 53 claims, were assessed by reference to the matrix and the 150,000 limit.
Yes.
That's right?
Yes.
And they were assessed by the same group of independent people, independent of the Army?
No, they're assessed by our claims committee. On the claims committee, which I chair, it's made up of a number of officers, and we also have an independent psychologist that sits on there.
So it's in relation to I think barristers you indicated earlier were involved?
They did the claims review, but the actual decision with what payments will be made and won't be made sits with the claims committee.
So can we just clarify one thing related to this? How many claims have the Salvation Army dealt with in relation to child sexual abuse in the Eastern Territory in total?
I would have to get back to you with
Well,
that.
you indicated that the barristers reviewed all of your files.
Yes.
So how many files did they review? We heard in the Southern Territory it was 422. So what's the figure in the Eastern Territory?
I would need to look that up.
In the order of what figure?
Again, I couldn't tell you. I know we have dealt with roughly 200 claims, but I'm not sure.
I think it'd be helpful so that we
Yes,
have a comparison to the Eastern Territory the same way. And the second part of that is a clarification as to how many were reassessed, so that we compare between Southern Territory, because the sheets that Ms Vanessa is referring to only refer to those 4 boys' homes,
Yes.
and they are not a summary of those files that were reviewed.
Yes.
They're a subset. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the total number of claims is, on your estimate, at least 3 to 4 times higher than the figures we're looking at. Is that correct?
I would have to come back to you with that. I will draw your attention, though, to Table 11 that does talk about at the top-up claims that we...
I'm just having trouble hearing. Maybe.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, thank
Move
you.
a bit closer.
Yes, sorry.
Table 11 refers to the top-up claims that weren't litigated.
Sure. I appreciate that. Ms Vanessa may or may not go to that, but I just want to be absolutely clear. This is a subset of the total claims. These are not a reflection of the reviews, but they are a reflection of the decisions that have been made by that particular claims committee.
Yes.
Well, in respect of the 4 homes, the subject of case study 5.
Yes.
So what has been done is to provide the information relevant to those 4 homes.
Yes.
The intention hasn't been to provide information relevant to institutional sexual abuse claims more generally to the Salvation Army.
No, in my understanding, but I will get back to you with the answer.
What do you mean by representative of finalised claims?
Where's that?
It's the note to tables 2 and 3. So, I mean, the way you reconcile table 1 and table 2 is you've reflected what's said to be a representative of finalised claim.
I'm not sure. I will check up on that. I would assume, though, we finalised many claims, but to deal with the remit of the Royal Commission. This is the table for that.
Well,
but I will double check.
Table 1 has got 63 in it, and they're all either claims without litigation or claims not finalised,
Yes.
10 of them. Now, those 10, I understand, at the moment anyway, are in Table 2, but they're somehow worked into the numbers as numbers that are representative of finalised claims, and I'm just curious as to what that means, what the process there is.
I'll talk to the people that have put these figures together for me in the break, and I'll come back with an answer to that, if that's okay.
It's the case that the second table is all 63, and it necessarily follows that 10 of those claims haven't been finalised, isn't it?
That's right.
And so it's possible that the representative figure takes into account that 10 haven't been finalised.
I'll just check up
But you've
if
got to
that's
work
what was.
out how much you expect them to be finalised for.
Yes, and that is well and truly beyond me, Your Honour, but I'm sure we can get
I
some
will get
advice
an
after
answer.
lunch on that. Now, just
What the table suggests, of course, is a rising minimum payment.
Yes.
And presumably that's a recognition reflected in these numbers that the past minimum payments probably weren't appropriate.
Yes.
But your median stays pretty much the same as does your average, except when you get to 2016 and your average jumps very significantly.
Yes.
Just going back to the process, what information came to the committee you've described that made the decision about the amounts?
The committee looks at the impact statements that we get from a survivor. Also, there can be psychological reports, counselling reports. There can be a number of reports, as well as the history of when they stayed within our homes, the length of time, whether there were siblings in the home, separation from siblings. Yes, so we weigh up all that evidence.
Some of that material was provided to you by the claimant.
Yes.
Some of it must have been a result of the investigation
That's
by
right.
you as to period of time in the home.
Yes.
What was given to you by those who were assessing the claim?
All that information comes in a pack for pre-reading.
Yeah, from whom?
Oh, from our Centre for Restoration.
So what information was provided by those external people who assessed the claim that you took into account or otherwise as part of your process?
They actually gave us information on what we needed to look at again, how we did our processing. They didn't look at this actual claim here should have this. They gave us an overall recommendation about our processing of the claims.
Sorry, that doesn't make it clear
Okay.
the process that was followed. You heard Commissioner Tidd explain the process and the criteria for which files were to be assessed. And then, once the criteria was known, it was then applied, and then payments were altered or otherwise, depending upon a similar matrix, although a lesser upper limit. You heard that evidence?
Yes.
What I'm seeking to understand is what was done in the Eastern Territory, and you can, by all means, use what Commissioner Tidd said as a template, if you like. Did you follow that template? Did you do something different?
No, we actually assessed how we handled claims, not the amount of money paid to people.
So
that was our files assessment.
What was the criteria you assessed as to how you handled it?
The type of information we gained from people, whether we had impact statements from the survivors, whether people actually believed survivors in the statements that were given. I'm sorry, I can't give much more information that I haven't got any more information to that, I guess.
Well, you sat on the committee. What was your job on the committee, or what was the job of the committee?
The Claims Committee Yeah, the claims committee is to look at what we will pay a survivor.
Based
Purely
on
and
what
simply.
criteria?
Based on all the information that we have from the Centre for Restoration and from the survivor. We have a matrix, and the matrix becomes a criteria that we use.
Are you speaking about claims that have come to you for the first time?
And for review as well.
And in relation to the claims for review, who decided which claims you'd review and which you wouldn't?
We didn't go and ask, we didn't say that we're going to review everybody's claim individually. As people have come to us asking for a review, we have taken that review.
I see. So unlike the Southern Territory, which reviewed
Yes,
all claims over a
we
period of
didn't
time,
review
you
claims like that.
reviewed only those claims where people came to you and said, please review my
Yes,
claim.
yes.
Did you think about doing similarly to the Southern Territory and looking at them all?
Well, we could take that on board, yes.
I don't know, did you consider
Oh, did
doing
we?
it that way?
No. Not in my understanding.
Sorry, but I just need to clarify, in relation to the two barristers that you engaged, I thought your evidence was that they reviewed all of your claim files.
They reviewed all our claim files, the handling of the
Correct.
claims, yes.
So in relation to a general review, they looked at all the claims. In
Yes.
relation to the questions Ms Fernez is raising, these are in relation to not that review, but people subsequently coming individually to you, seeking a review that goes through your Centre for Restoration and eventually to the Claims Committee.
Yes,
So have I got that correct? That's
Yes.
the process.
yes.
Okay.
What was done with the barristers' review? What did that achieve?
That really changed our professional standards office to the Centre for Restoration. The claims reviews that the barristers looked at showed that our file management, just our management of survivors, working with survivors, was not sufficient. So we needed to look at how we handle this differently.
But that process didn't lead to any individual response from the Army to any of the files they looked at.
Individual response.
Well, the barristers looked at all the files and then
Yes.
made recommendations about process, but as I understand what you're saying, that didn't result in those individuals who were the subject of a prior determination being contacted and their situation reviewed.
We'd made under recommendation from psychologists not to contact people who had previous payments made because of the trauma involved in that. But we had said, and we had put on our website and in a number of places, that we would review claims.
Can you just help me with table 11, the last table? The top-up payment referred to there, is that the ultimate payment or is that the amount of extra then?
That's the amount of extra that people got.
Well, that suggests that the Eastern Territory review process is leading to far more significant intervention than perhaps the Southern. Is that right?
I can't comment on that.
Can anyone help me there?
Commissioner Tidd?
I think what I'm understanding from the review that's taken place to 2014 through 2016 review of top-up was a different study than was done for the Southern Territory. The Southern Territory's commitment was to review all 422 cases on an internal review to ensure there has been fairness in the assessment across the settled claims. It was not with regards to current or a future determination of a $65,000 average or $150,000 or $200,000 cap. It was on existing practice of what was consistent, awaiting what would be the response to a national redress from the Commonwealth.
Well, hopefully that comes efficiently and effectively, but you're in the position at the moment where you understand there's those who look at what you're doing, a real inconsistency.
Now, if I can ask you to turn to volume 2 of the tender bundle, it's tab 80. It may well be that commissioners might like to look at the original. It might be easier if the original is available. So tab 2, volume 80. Now you're familiar with this document, are you? Lieutenant?
I have looked at it, yes.
You have. So this, it's dated the 25th of September 2014, which postdates the 5th and 10th case study hearing, that's right? And it's a report of review of all finalised claims from survivors of child sexual abuse from boys and girls' homes. So it's not limited to before the subject of the hearing.
Yes.
That's right. And can you help us with why this was prepared?
In my understanding, we wanted to make sure that we had fulfilled all our obligations and to look at the files to make sure that we hadn't missed any and that we had handled things appropriately.
So if you look at paragraph 1 on page 2, it says that the Eastern Territory gave an undertaking to the Royal Commission that it would conduct a review of all finalised claim files against the matrix of relevant factors used at the time of the claim. So that's your matrix as opposed to the Royal Commission's recommended matrix. And then the review would identify whether the matrix was applied correctly. Now, that's, it appears from this document, a task that you gave to the lawyers. That's right?
Yes.
And then it seems from the second paragraph that 486 files were reviewed, and those files were in part related to, no, I withdraw that, in addition to those files, the PICC, which is the Personal Injuries Claim Committee, minutes were accessed to look at claims considered by them. See that in the...
Yes.
So do we take it then that the 341 is in addition to the 486?
I'm sorry, I don't know that, no.
Can you tell us what the earlier date was for the files to be selected? We have the date of August as the final date, and we've got the date for the PICC. We don't have the date for the files that were reviewed. Well, not that I can see immediately. Can you help us with that?
No, I'm sorry, I can't.
Your Honour, what might be a more useful exercise is for there to be a greater understanding of this document by reference to those who perhaps created it, number one, and two...
I think its chief author is sitting behind you.
I beg your pardon?
Its chief author is sitting behind you.
Well, that's precisely who I was intending to consult. And then at tab 84, there's a document that's similarly headed but dated 24 February 2015, and that's referred to as the third report. And perhaps again I'll come to an understanding as to what it all means. Your Honour, I notice it's 10 to 1, but it might be more convenient to take the adjournment now in order for this to occur.
Very well, we'll do that.
Thank you.
We'll adjourn.